Hello, and welcome to another vlog. I hope everyone enjoyed their weekend. Anyway, this week's theme is Down syndrome. So I want to talk a little bit about preferred language. Now, when it comes to talking about Down syndrome and really disabilities in general, there's a few things that you need to remember, and there are a few guidelines that you should follow. Number one, it's very important to use people first language. So, what I mean by this is to put the person before their disability. So instead of saying that someone is a Down syndrome person or that they're a wheelchair person, you should say that someone has Down syndrome or that they are in a wheelchair. That way, you're putting the individual before their disability. This is important because although someone's disability is part of them, it's not their entire personality. So it shouldn't be the characteristic that is used to define. The second thing to remember is to avoid using any language that denotes negative attitudes towards disability. So any words or language that promote pity or anything along the lines of that, you should avoid using. So, for example, you shouldn't say things like so and so is suffering from their disability, because most people with disabilities don't view their disability as something that they suffer from. They just view it as part of who they are. And then finally, it's important to not use any derogatory terms. Now, obviously, there are a lot of outdated and very hurtful terms to describe people with disabilities. And this should go without saying, but you should avoid using those terms at all costs because their primary purpose is to inflict pain and to degrade people and to put them down. And that doesn't just apply to people with disabilities, that applies to all people. You just shouldn't use derogatory terms. Um, and like I said, it's something that I really shouldn't have to say, but I do hear people using a lot of these derogatory terms on a regular basis, and it really does upset me because they're words that I just don't think that you should use. So I just want to stress the importance of avoiding those outdated terms. And although these guidelines apply specifically to Down syndrome in this example, they really apply to people with all kinds of disabilities. And so that got me thinking, how do these negative attitudes towards disability affect other people with other kinds of disabilities? And how have they affected me? So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the negative attitudes that I've experienced, how they make me feel, and how I deal with them. So the main thing that I've noticed is that a lot of people assume that because I have a disability, my life is less meaningful or that I have a lower quality of life than an able-bodied person. And this just is not the case. I'm very happy with the way my life is. I'm very content with what I've accomplished. And frankly, I really enjoy life. And I don't see my disability as something that gets in the way of it. A lot of people will make assumptions about what I can and can't do. And this will oftentimes lead them to helping me without asking. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, although their intentions are good, more often than not, this causes more problems than it fixes. And people will oftentimes be surprised when they learn about my accomplishments, when they find out that I went to school and college and that I've entered the workforce and that I've lived on my own. And in some ways, this is a generational thing. There's a lot of elderly people who are very surprised when they hear those kinds of things because I guess 30 years ago when they were growing up and when they were younger, this was unheard of. Most people with disabilities didn't accomplish these kinds of things because the vast majority of them were institutionalized. Um, and not everyone realizes just how much things have changed and how profoundly different they are. But this doesn't just apply to the elderly. There's a lot of young people who also believe some of these outdated things, that people with disabilities are incapable. Um, and another thing that I notice is that a lot of people, able-bodied people, tend to be a little nervous around me, almost like they're uncomfortable with my disability or that they're scared of offending me. But I imagine it's probably a bit of both. And so because of that, people will often patronize me and talk down to me or treat me like I'm a child, or sometimes they'll just act very nervous around me. And that can be very frustrating. So basically, these negative attitudes don't usually make me feel very good. They mainly make me feel like I'm an outcast because people treat me differently, which makes it harder for me to fit in. And that's not really a good feeling. It's almost like people think that because I have a disability, my life is less valuable than theirs. Um, And maybe that's just me reading into it a little bit too much, but that is sometimes how it comes across. So how do I deal with that? Well, the main thing that I do is I educate people. I'll proudly tell people about my accomplishments, and I'll answer any questions that they have about my disability, and I'll basically do everything in my power to educate them so that I can maybe eliminate some of that ignorance that they have. Um, and I think really that's the solution when it comes to eliminating negative attitudes is education. It doesn't help to get angry at people and to uh, argue with them because all that does is just reinforce those negative attitudes in their mind. I think it's important to educate people and explain to them why are these attitudes wrong and why are they harmful and how should you talk about things like disability and things like that. And the good news is, as people become more aware of disabilities and more resources become readily available, those negative attitudes are slowly disappearing. And I am optimistic that there will be a day when these negative attitudes don't exist anymore. And hopefully that will be during my lifetime. So that's just kind of a brief overview of some of the ways in which these negative attitudes have affected me. And it was just something that I really wanted to talk about in today's vlog. Anyway, I will be releasing a video on Thursday in which I talk more about what Down syndrome is, so subscribe if you want to see that video. And also be sure to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And of course, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos like this one, then please support me on Patreon. Anyway, thanks for watching, and see you on Thursday.